my apologies for my voice. Some of you may feel it's symbolic that the herald of peace should be struck dumb. And I may run out of voice before Christine deems that I've run out of time. Pity the National Security Advisor, who predicted in the September 2023 edition of Foreign Affairs magazine that the United States could safely reduce its focus on the Middle East. He was badly caught out, as we all know, by the unprecedentedly brutal Hamas attacks in October of that year and their appalling aftermath. Lucky the Cambridge academic, who laid out some general principles for a regional settlement in 2015 and stated in a book proposal 7 years later that the Middle East was ripe for a comprehensive peace settlement. That was 2022. The poor National Security Advisor, of course, was Jake Sullivan. And the lucky academic, of course, was me. I was fortunate because what my co-authors and I wrote a decade ago is long forgotten, and my 2022 predictions are safely buried with my literary agent and publishers, and now, of course, with you. And indeed, I'm lucky that I'm speaking last, because I've been able to adapt my remarks to the recent Israeli attacks on the Iranian nuclear weapons program. Now, despite decades of war and brutality, the Middle East, this much is clear, still has the capacity to surprise us. Even those who, unlike the present speaker, are regional experts, are constantly being taken aback by the Arab Spring, by the implosion of Syria, by the Hamas attacks. Sadly, most of these surprises, such as the 7th of October 2023, have been deeply unpleasant. But some of them, such as the collapse of the Ba'athist regime in late 2024, were pleasant, at least for the time being. 15 years ago, MBS was a little-known advisor to his father. Ahmed al-Sharaa was a member of Al-Qaeda, I believe, and Donald Trump was running The Apprentice. Today, they are respectively the unquestioned ruler of Saudi Arabia, the president of Syria, and the president of the United States. Who knows, therefore, what the situation will be in 15 years' time? So why not imagine a better future? Not, of course, a utopia. Walter Russell Mead rightly warned us against that, but at least a vision which goes, I would say, with the current run of play in the region, even if the last few days suggest otherwise. Now, the principles which the historian of Iran, Michael Axworthy, the historian of early modern Germany, Patrick Milton, and I set out in the piece in the New Statesman, and subsequently in a full-length book, which is available for perusal in the lobby here, may point the way forward. We noted that the 17th century Holy Roman Empire of the German nation was plagued by many of the same problems which roiled the Middle East today. During the terrible 30 Years' War, a combination of religious strife, political divisions, and external intervention tore Germany apart, and indeed destabilized the whole of Europe. These tensions were eventually, if not solved, then at least managed by the Treaty of Westphalia, which brought that conflict to an end in 1648. Now, this treaty addressed the problem at the three key levels. First of all, relations within states, or as they call them at the time, estates or territories of the empire. Secondly, relations between the German states or estates. And thirdly, the relations between Germany and the great powers. Contrary to a widespread view, beloved of international relations theorists, Westphalia did not bring about the modern European state based on state sovereignty. In fact, it was the exact opposite. A power-sharing system in Germany which created an area of shared sovereignty guaranteed not only by the German protagonists themselves, but also by external powers. Political conflict and religious conflict was juridified by the appellate courts to which the various parts of the Holy Roman Empire, and sometimes even individual subjects, could bring their grievances. Westphalia succeeded where earlier attempts had failed because it was largely comprehensive, with very few actors excluded, addressing, as it did, the totality of conflicts within Germany, and because it was constructed in line with great power interests. Our hope, that is the Westphalia Project's hope, in the spirit of applied history, was that this settlement might serve as an inspiration for the Middle East. The idea, which was operationalized in the Westphalia for the Middle East program of the Centre for Geopolitics at Cambridge, which of course is an AJI partner, gained some traction in the region and among mediators. The German Foreign Office also took a keen interest for a while, and the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier advanced the concept in a number of speeches. More recently, the Westphalia program has been reinforced by the noted Arabist and former diplomat Sir John Jenkins, who of course was here at the conference, and the historian of Iran, Professor Ali Ansari, also here in the audience. But the Middle East, which was already in a bad shape at that time, took a turn for the worse. Russia intervened directly in Syria, exacerbating the conflict there. Saudi Arabia and Iran edged ever closer to conflict, with Iranian drone attacks on Saudi oil fields. Iraq, though much more stable than it had been since the fall of Saddam Hussein, refused to settle down, destabilized by Iranian interference and the spillover from Syria. Lebanon began to dissolve again into chaos, partly for political and partly for economic reasons. Worse, the instability seemed to be spreading as Libya was consumed by anarchy, the Iranian-backed Houthis seized much of Yemen, as we heard, and Turkey and France faced off in the eastern Mediterranean. The Israel-Palestine dispute enjoyed much less salience than previously, but rumbled on, of course, before exploding again so dramatically in October 2023. Diplomatic efforts to bring peace to the region failed, be they American, Russian, or regional. All this underlined a key lesson from Westphalia, which was that piecemeal schemes of pacification do not work. This is partly because they are vulnerable to disruption by the excluded spoilers, and partly because those parts of the region left unresolved threaten to subvert recently stabilized spaces through the so-called contagion effect. So one example of the former would be the role of Iran and Palestinian rejectionists in trying to sabotage rapprochement between Israel and some Arab states. An instance of the latter might be the way in which the Islamic State returned from Syria back into Iraq, undoing years of US and Iraqi government state-building efforts. So only a truly all-embracing, or at least near-comprehensive settlement would be able to bring peace. Recently, though, there have been important changes at the key three levels of internal politics, regional interstate politics, and great power politics, which may be conducive to a wider Middle Eastern compromise. In Gaza, Hamas has miscalculated and is unlikely to emerge from the conflict as a serious military political actor. Of course, it may have a legacy, but it will not probably be an actor. And Hezbollah has been profoundly weakened in Lebanon, in both cases reducing their and Iran's ability to act as spoilers in Israel, as spoilers in the system. We've heard about that. In Israel, Netanyahu, the principal barrier there to a two-state solution, and perhaps to any kind of Palestinian deal with the Palestinians, has, I think, lost domestic and, above all, international legitimacy. In Syria, the fall of the Assad regime and its replacement by what appears to be a much more cautious and less internationally belligerent government opens doors that have been shut for more than 60 years. While the regime of the mullahs in Iran is not yet on the verge of collapse, it has lost a lot of legitimacy in recent years, as we heard, and is now, of course, under serious military attack. And this vulnerability should make it more amenable to a wider-ranging agreement. Relations between the regional powers are better than they've been for a long time. Saudi Arabia and Iran have made a start at rapprochement, ostensibly thanks to Chinese mediation, but largely, I'm told, through the good work of Oman. Despite the pressures created by the killing of tens of thousands of civilians in Gaza, the Abrahamic Accords between Israel, Morocco, Bahrain, the United Emirates still stand. If some sort of agreement can be reached over Palestine, then it is likely that Saudi Arabia will join them. At the global level, the escalating tensions between the great powers are less destabilizing for the region than they have been for some time. Russia has been largely ejected politically from Syria. It's still hanging on in the bases, but her disruptive role is much diminished. The People's Republic of China has made its first serious diplomatic foray into the region in support of Saudi-Iranian reconciliation. It, that is Beijing, has a profound interest in the stability of the Gulf in order to protect its energy supply. India has also re-engaged with the region after an interval of more than half a century, with its vision of an India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. And of course, there are the human links, which we heard about earlier. At the same time, Washington has sought direct talks with old enemies such as Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, and Iran. More generally, the Trump administration has been musing about creating the political basis for a wider unlocking of the region's economic potential. In short, at all three levels, internal, regional, and international, a window of opportunity may be opening up. But of course, it may shut again very quickly. And we have seen many false dawns. One is reminded of the words of Viktor Chernomyrdin, the Russian figure from the 90s, spoken with respect to Russia, but applicable to the Middle East. That quote, "We hoped for the best, but it turned out as usual." The question now is whether one can seize the opportunity and knit together a comprehensive peace plan before the region erupts again, or escalates. This will require finding the sweet spot between pressure and reassurance to make a settlement attractive. Some actors need to feel safe before they can engage, others may have to be made felt a little unsafer, and some may need a combination of the two. How then, in my last 3.5 minutes, might a settlement... 3 and 20 minutes. That, of course, is a matter for the protagonists, be they internal, regional, or international. But I think we need to draw on some of the Westphalian principles. First of all, there will be some actors who will have no voice, probably Hamas and Islamic State radical Islamist groups. There's precedent for that in Westphalia, which I can go into. Secondly, but there will be groups like Hezbollah, I think, who will be at the table. Secondly, those areas which have shown themselves to be, for whatever reason, unable to function effectively as sovereign states would combine to form an area of shared sovereignty in which disputes were subject to legal arbitration by a Middle Eastern communities court, say. Thirdly, some groups, such as the various Lebanese communities, would enjoy legal recourse to protect these rights, whereas others, perhaps like the Arabs of Khuzestan mentioned earlier, would not get them, for various reasons to do with power politics. Now, the area of shared sovereignty, which one might call the Arab Confederation, would include those spaces which have been scourged by weak governments, civil war, and external intervention. Some, such as Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, are conveniently contiguous. Others, such as the Palestinian territories and Yemen, are more widely separated. One possibility for Gaza and the West Bank might be federation with Egypt and Jordan, respectively. Alternatively, building on the abortive Arab peace plan of 2002, the Palestinian territories could be part of a single conglomerate within the Arab Confederation. But either way, they, Israel, and everybody else would guarantee each other, and they would each have recourse to a regional court, say the Middle East Court of States, comparable to one in the Westphalia settlement. And all this would be placed, finally, under the guarantee not only of the internal and regional parties, but the great powers and the international organizations as well. The United States, the PRC, Russia, UK, France, perhaps the EU. The objective of the guarantee would be to both restrain the regional actors and, crucially, to take the Middle East out of the clash of the great powers. This clash of great powers, of course, would continue and probably intensify in other parts of the world, just as the Treaty of Westphalia did not end the Franco-Spanish War, but it did ensure that it did not continue any longer on German soil. Such a settlement could only come about through a comprehensive conference at which all the major players, be they states, non-state actors, or great powers, were represented. The convener might be the Vatican, which is well recognized in the region and has experience. It could be facilitated by regional mediators such as Oman and external ones such as Norway, Sweden, and Germany. And my last sentence is, it would take time to agree such a settlement, of course, which is why discussions should begin now, before we enter on an even more destructive cycle of conflict than the one begun on Friday. And I'm glad that my voice held out, at least until now.